All right, that sounds good. All right, well, we're at 12:01, so we're going to go ahead and start. And I'm sure we'll have some other people filter in as we go. Welcome, everybody that's already here. I'm sure we'll have a few more join in a little while. My name is Ross Green. I am the Ag and Natural Resources Agent for Evans County Extension and Candler County Extension. And we wanted to put this little program together for some people to learn a few more things about trying to do some better food plots and wanted to share some good information with you. So I'm going to start things off with a quick presentation about doing some soil sampling, and then I'm going to turn the meeting over to Bob. So first off, I just wanted to introduce myself. We did that. And one more time, I'm going to say, if you have any content questions, put those in the Q&A. And then if you're having any kind of technical difficulties or need to respond to us as the host, put that in the chat. Again, I'm Ross Green. And then our speaker today is going to be Mr. Bob Westerfield. He is a fruit and vegetable horticulturalist, and he is based out of the Griffin campus. So we'll go ahead and start my presentation. So the soil sampling, three main things I was going to say is, some people want to know what a soil sample is. I want to talk about why you should take soil samples and then give a little information about how to take one. So a soil sample is basically you go out and take several soil cores from a selected area, and that could be from your field, food plot, garden spot, your lawn, and we mix all that soil together, and then we send it off to a soil lab. And the soil lab gives us a report back. And that report basically kind of tells us the nutrient levels in our soil. And then we use that report as a tool to help us come up with a, fertilization program for our garden or food plot or whatever we're wanting to do. And I use this analogy here in this bottom that, this gives you the inventory of how much plant food you have in your soil. So when we do that, that's just kind of helps out. So the next slide I have, this is a lot of the main nutrients that we have for plant food. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are our main macronutrients. And these can vary on the availability into the plant based on the pH of your soil. So a lot of times we're planting food plots out in the middle of woods, and these are not really disturbed very often. So we could have a pH on a lot of these food plots that are down here around this 5 range, or some especially if it was just cleaned up. In pines, it could be almost down to 4.5. Well, when your pH is down around this 4.5 to 5 range, these nutrients up here are not available to your plants to absorb. So what you want to do is, if you take a soil sample, it gives you a readout on what your pH is. And then you're able to say, well, if my pH is a 5.5, we need to apply some lime to get that pH up. And then that helps get these nutrients more available to your crop. And 6.5 is the magic number that we shoot for most of the time. And that 6.5 range is where almost all of these nutrients are the most available at one time. Now, one thing I will mention about this, when we're talking about planting legumes, so some of our clovers and some of our peas that we use in food plots, they're going to want to have a higher pH. So you want to be somewhere around a 6.5 to a 7 on those. So if you're spending a lot of money on, trying to plant some of these higher dollar clovers that you're wanting to establish, especially like these white clovers that are annual or perennial that will continue to grow, you want to have that pH up here above a 6.5 to a 7 to ensure that they don't just come up and die. Because if you're trying to plant clover at a 5 pH, it'll come up and die, or it will just come up and not last very long. So keep that in mind. we're talking about taking soil samples, usually you want to try to do it in a randomized pattern over your area. So let's say your garden is a square box. You can either do a zigzag pattern. You can kind of just, make a circle, but you want to do it randomly. You don't want to just do it in a straight line, because doing it in a straight line, you could basically, that could be where last year all your fertilizer got dumped out in one spot, and then that spot might be good. But if you skip over 50 feet or 100 feet, it could be different. So you want to take a randomized sample of the whole area to give you a picture of the entire location. So a lot of times when we do soil sampling, you want to kind of get you a shovel and dig down, and we're trying to get that top 4-inch of dirt. And that is the area that you're trying to test, because that's where most of your plant roots are going to be. And you want to test the soil nutrients there. And so by doing that, if you dig you a little hole, and I've got a picture over here, and I don't know if y'all can see my mouse or not, but you just want to take a little vertical slice of the soil. And then we also have soil sampling probes, and the soil probes do this exact same thing. You just don't have to, dig a hole. So if you can actually come and borrow those from most of the local extension offices, we'll loan those out for free. And we also provide the bags there. So if you're interested in doing a soil sample, which I highly recommend before you plant any crop, come by one of your local extension offices, get you some soil sample bags, can borrow our probe, go to your house or to your food plot, take your randomized samples over a small area. And then usually if you've got multiple food plots, you want to take one per food plot. So that kind of gives you an idea of what you got in each place. If you're trying to do in like a lawn and you're going through grass, you kind of want to peel that grass and that thatch layer back to expose the surface before you actually take that sample. And then, 8 to 10 probings from, different areas across the food plot or your garden. And then you take all those and put them in a bucket together and mix it up, and then pour them in your soil sample bag. And then another thing we want you to do is make sure you label what crop you're growing there, whether you're going to be planting like a clover or a legume. That's going to differ from the amount of nutrient that you have to put. So, if you're putting a forage grass, it's going to give you one result as recommendation of how much plant food to put down. And another thing to keep in mind is when you're talking about food plots, a lot of times it's going to be giving you a per acre plant, food recommendation. And a lot of times that is going to be in an actual element, not in pounds. So you may want to get your extension agent to help you interpret those results, and they can, work with you on telling you how much you need to get. And with that, that's the end of my little presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Bob, and he's going to start talking about our food plots and our plantings and whatnot. So Bob, I'm going to turn the meeting over to you.
Okay, I'll do the share screen here, I guess. Okay, are we seeing the right view there, Ross? Or
all right, you need to do the screen swap like we talked about earlier.
How about that? Is that working?
Just click on it one more time. It hasn't shown up on our end.
Okay, it did on mine. It shifted here, so
maybe it's just taking it a second for it to link up. There we go. All right.
Let's see, and let me bring this back one. Okay.
All right.
We good to go?
All right.
All right.
Turning it over to Bob. He is our speaker for the day.
Good afternoon, folks, or early afternoon, I guess. This is Bob Westerfield from University of Georgia. I'm in the horticulture department, and I normally work with small grower operations, vegetables, fruits, as well as consumers. So I'm tickled to death to be able to talk a little bit about something that's really a passion of mine, something I've been doing forever, it seems, and that is creating wildlife food plots. I've been around a long time at the university, over 30 years, and have done quite a few wildlife programs over the years, but it's been a while since I've been asked to do one, so this is pretty cool. Just a little background, I do own a farm, actually. I've got a farm over in a little town called The Rock, which is south of Griffin here, about 35 minutes. On that farm, we raise some livestock, we grow vegetables, but I also do a lot of deer hunting, as well as duck hunting, rabbit hunting, just about anything you can kind of attract. I try to do that. I also plant a dove field. But I manage quite a few little food plots, not only on that property, but on some of our hunting club properties as well. So been doing it for a while. I wrote for a couple of years for QDM Magazine, if you're familiar with that. That's Quality Deer Management Magazine, where I did their food plot profiles. And that was really fun to kind of be involved in that. So we're going to look at food plots and why we might do them, what's involved. Mostly we're going to focus kind of on to some extent, the big game food plots. We're talking about deer, maybe turkey, but we'll also mention a little bit about small game as we go. Hopefully, maybe you'll have some good questions at the end of the program we can help answer, and we'll go from there. I'll just mention, one of my preferred ways to hunt, and of course, it's going to start this weekend. I really love muzzleloader. And when I say muzzleloader, I'm not really talking about the inline muzzleloaders with the scopes and so forth. I'm kind of a primitive guy. So when it comes to bow hunting, I usually use a longbow or a recurve. And on the muzzleloader side, I use a flintlock. So I really just love the primitive type weapons. Normally during the gun season, I'm still hunting with the flintlock. Sometimes I swap back and forth to the bow and arrow. But we're going to talk about effective food plots depending on and no matter what you hunt with, whether it be a rifle, that's capable of shooting 500 yards, or you're going to be using a bow that's maybe a 20-yard weapon. So let's take a look at that. So why would you even build a food plot? What are your priorities? Is it deer? Is it turkeys? Maybe you're interested only in bringing in small game for bird, for rabbits. Maybe you just want more game on your property. Maybe you want bigger game. Well, I think all of these things can kind of be combined. Let me just say that I don't think I've ever built a wildlife food plot, and primarily for probably deer and turkeys, that didn't bring in other things, whether it even be songbirds or rabbits, squirrels. They all find it eventually, because it's changing sort of the standard of the hardwoods or clear cut, and it's putting some diversity in there. So they all find that attractive, even if it's just the edges. So I think you can create food plots that'll probably hit all of these. Are you going to have more game? Well, it really depends. It depends on the deer density or turkey density, other type things as well. And also, are they going to get bigger? Am I going to have more? It really depends. Depends on how much competition you have. Are there other folks out there building food plots? Is there agricultural crops nearby? Certainly all of that can help. Whether or not it brings it to your specific spot has a lot to do with how you lay that out. We're going to look at baiting, which we now know is legal in all of the state. Just recently, it kind of moved into the northern part of the zone, versus food plots. What does it cost? Is it worth it to actually spend the money on food plots? Is the payback worth all the time and investment you're going to put in? Let's look a little bit about the equipment. Also, am I going to have any help to do this? I have built many food plots on my own, but it is always nicer when you got a few companions or buddies there to help you load seed, and particularly depending on what type of equipment you have, it can be pretty labor intensive. How many food plots do I need on my property? How big should each one of those be? We'll kind of look at that. We mentioned already the competition. Am I going to put a small, tiny little quarter-acre food plot here when I'm sitting right next to a giant soybean field or corn? Maybe it's really not worth it, because you already got this monster food plot per se in agriculture right next to you. What else can I do to be attractive to wildlife? Do I have a food source, and that's the wildlife food plot, or mass crops, fruit trees? Do I have water nearby, which we know everything's going to need? And shelter being in most cases some type of bedding cover. And then finally, and we're going to look at this in detail, what should I plant? What type of seed should I put in? And we'll also look a little bit about fruit and other type things. All right, let's just kind of address this right up front. Why would I spend all the money on a food plot if now I can just go to Walmart, go to Sports Academy or wherever, and buy a bag of corn and put it in a feeder? And, sometimes that's a good question. And I think for some that have limited land, limited resources and equipment, money and help, maybe you should run a feeder. I have never been a huge advocate of game feeders. I would actually prefer they not be legalized, but that's just my opinion. There are plenty of studies that show that even feeding corn to deer in some cases can be bad. There can be toxins in there that can hurt the herd. But that, that being said, there's a lot of corn and other things going out of feeders. I would say the most useful thing I found for it is if you're using it to monitor the deer, particularly after the season. You want to say, hey, what bucks are left on my property? Or do I have any turkeys, coming in? Using it as a monitoring tool to get some good camera pics is where I see it being done. I've never wanted to hunt over a feeder before. I know folks that do. Normally, a large animal, if you're after it, a big buck, is not going to normally come in the daytime to a feeder. He may visit it at night, and certainly your does and everything will come in there. But it's not often that a big buck's going to come into that, and it's expensive. Corn has been sky high right now. I've seen 50-pound bags of corn going for $9 and $10, and that's pretty high. Versus a food plot. A food plot we're going to talk about initially costs a lot of money, but once you've got it sort of established, even in a perennial crop, perhaps. I think long term, it probably is more economical than feeding deer. Okay, so what do we hope to attract? Small game, large game. Again, in my farm, it's going to be a variety of things. Normally, the way it works out for me in the springtime, I'm planting a dove field. So I'm out there planting my millet, sometimes a little bit of sunflower. I am hoping to bring in all the birds I can in September. And most years we bring in a few. On the same token, it's actually feeding the deer because the deer come in there and actually eat the millet heads. And if you got sunflowers out there, they're going to eat them as well. If you've ever planted them before, you know that. Then there's the question of, hey, do I plant a warm season food plot, or do I plant a cool season food plot, or do I plant both? I have managed several hunting clubs before where I was in charge of all the food plots, and we have been down this road several times. And this would be my statement, which you may argue with, but at the end of the day, particularly in Georgia, we have a very sub-temperate climate where it's warm and there's a lot of stuff flushing out. I don't think it pays huge dividends to plant summer food plots, particularly when we're talking about for deer. Now, there are some things I think you can plant that will give you a little bit of summer benefit, but actually helps you in the fall that we'll go over in a second. But just going in there to plant a, say, summer annual crop for a long-term summer basis, it's just too tricky. We have such summers this year. It may have worked well. We had a lot of rain. There's other high droughty type scenarios where they just fizzle out too quickly. I just don't think the cost of the fertilizer and the seed is worth it, considering there's so much green already out there. Okay, so you're feeding those deer, so to speak. That's a nice thing, but I think putting your efforts into the fall food plot is going to be much more important, in my opinion. But let's look at each and a little bit about cost and see where we go from there. What does it cost to build a food plot? Well, it all depends. How much land do you have? How many acres of food plots? Are we talking about maybe less than an acre food plots are you going to build? Certainly you got to have equipment, and we'll look at that a little bit later. But if you did have to have a tractor for some fairly large acres, now we're talking anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000 for that piece of equipment. Fuel, it can certainly eat up a lot of fuel when you're running powerized equipment. Fertilizer is extremely expensive right now, so that is something you're going to have to factor in. In fact, most times I spend more on fertilizer really than I do on my seed. And that is something that, particularly when you're doing the soil sample, it's extremely important to get the fertility and lime out there. But just know that, hey, that's going to cost. In general, an acre food plot can really run anywhere, and this can vary depending on what you plant, but it's going to run several $100s per acre to plant a food plot. Particularly if you start throwing in herbicides, if you have to do, say, a beginning treatment, maybe you're going to spray the entire field out with glyphosate. Some of you know that as trade name would be Roundup, or you're going to be using some type of a pre-emergence. If you were planting, say, a warm season corn, you might want to go with atrazine in there. All those herbicides are sort of, the little dollar meter is ticking as you're making a tractor application with that sprayer. You're buying that chemical. So things to think about. What kind of maintenance do I have? and also the cost of the seed. Are there ways to kind of make that, less expensive? Maintenance. Am I going to have to go in there and mow this? How often will I have to go in there and replow it to replant? And then just the labor. It's a labor of love for me. I always enjoy doing the food plots. So I don't really count that as a dollar sign, but certainly, if you're managing a club and you need help to build those things, you're going to have to factor that in, as to some extent that is your time and it's worth money. We already covered pretty well on the fertility and the pH. And I'll just say this, I'm going to make this comment. Having done a lot of food plots in my life, it is difficult to put out enough lime. I don't think you could ever put enough lime out on your food plot. And if you've got, say, a 1/4 acre food plot or larger, and you're trying to put that out by hand, it is not easy. You need so much to get the quantity out there. I would try to do the best you can to line up a lime truck. Sometimes they're real quirky about coming into food plots, but I would just say, hey, I've got some agricultural fields I need you to do. The biggest thing is you want to have the roads cleared, give them a real good, easy access to get to your food plots where they're not going to be hitting trees, and brush going through. And most oftentimes you can get them to do it. But having a lime truck spread out, 2,000 to 3,000 pounds of lime per acre is way easier than loading bags of lime. If you ever try to put out even powdered lime in the back of a spreader on a tractor, or even, God forbid, on a little hand spreader, it's almost impossible. That stuff cakes up. So get the lime out there. As Ross said, it's extremely important to get the pH correct, and fertility. In general, most cases, a lot of our food plots are going to require anywhere from 200 to 300 pounds of fertilizer per acre. So that's something, when you're considering factors of cost, you're going to want to look at. Okay, then we got to make a determination of, well, how many food plots do I need, shape and size? And this is where it kind of gets into basically a lot of questions about, well, what is your goal? What type of equipment do you hunt with? So that's what we're going to look at. Are there areas I can plant that'll focus the deer in tighter? We know they're going to eat on this stuff, but can they be eating on it when I want them to be there? And where can I target those deer into the field to where I can get a clean shot? Or, if it's turkey, getting turkey in there and so forth. So size, shape, and quantity. I'll say this, I'm not a huge fan. I see these quite often. Sometimes you watch the TV shows and you see these celebrity hunters hunting on these, 100-acre food plots, or at least, 10 or 15 acres, big open, looks like a football field, and then all the deer start piling in. Well, I'm not going to say it always happens, but some of these things are on game ranches that are fenced in. The deer just know to go out there, and that's how they get these good quality shots. In some cases, big deer. I'm not saying it always happens like that. I'm a big fan of making irregular shaped food plots. I just think it's more natural. I think it gives you more opportunities for stand placements. And certainly if you bow hunt, it gives you an opportunity to bring that deer within range. So I'll say that right up front. I like irregular shaped food plots, and not necessarily one big, huge field. I'd rather have 3 smaller food plots that I could have, options to hunt on depending on the wind and other things, than one large one. How much do you need? It really depends. I mean, you'll read a lot of literature and it'll say, well, your land, it should have at least 10% food plots. It all depends. If you've got a huge agricultural commodity that's near you, where a farmer's planting corn and soybeans, or whatever, peanuts, you've got a built-in food plot there, so you can taper back. If you are the only game in town, you're in a large tract of land, then having maybe 10 to even 20% of your property in food plots would certainly be a big plus. You're going to literally pull deer over to your property. My situation on my farm is like that. I've only got like 140 acres, but I'm around a couple of thousand acres of timberland that I know of. I don't know if anyone plants any food plots there. So even though I don't have the large tract, I have a super attraction that I plant 7 or 8 food plots. Most of those get hammered pretty hard by the deer. I also have bedding cover. We'll talk about sanctuary zones, and I've got water on the property. So even though I'm a tiny little speck on the scheme of all this property, I'm sort of the place that's going to go. I'm the buffet for those deer. So a lot of it just depends on where your land is located, how much you have. What's the best shape for the food plot? Well, I already talked about not liking large, square rectangular food plots. I like some diversity. Also important to mention before I forget, I like a food plot that has got a lot of cover around it. So I want to have sunlight coming into the food plot for growth, but then on the edges, I really like it to be thick, whether it's briars, whether you create that by knocking down trees. In most cases, I want to sort of control where the deer are going to enter. Now, that's less of a factor, obviously, if you're gun hunting versus you're bow hunting. But even still, deer are going to feel much safer about coming out in the daylight if they've got a very easy escape route into thicker cover. So never put a food plot, if you've got a large, let's say, pasture, don't, if you have a 40-acre pasture, don't go to the center of it and put a food plot with no cover around it. Yeah, the deer are going to utilize that, but they're going to be utilizing that while you're sleeping at night. So we definitely want to try to have some escape cover right next to our food plot. I think that's a big plus. I like to shape my food plots because I hunt with primitive weapons, primarily bow and arrow. And even with the muzzleloader, you're looking at a range for me with primitive muzzleloader about 60 to 75 yards. I try to funnel my deer into the food plots. So they're normally going to be either long, elongated food plots, or they're going to be Y-shaped or C-shaped. I'm going to have it to where that deer is going to keep nibbling, work his way down, and eventually he's going to come to a certain spot in that field. And deer, as you know, they just don't sit in one spot. They'll eat a little bit, move, eat a little bit, and move. I don't want that deer to move off to where I can't get the shot. I want him to eventually, at some point, he's going to cross paths with me. And that's why I sort of design mine this way. So, we just talked about this. You got the rifle shot. Hey, the sky's the limit depending on how far you can shoot and what kind of scope rifle you have. If you got a 200-yard long food plot, that probably works out fine for you if you can make that shot. For primitive and bow, you better have something that looks more like on the left here, where I've got some pinch points. I've got it in tight to where if he's standing out there or he's anywhere near that food plot, I'm going to be able to get a shot. So a lot of consideration goes into this. For us, because I hunt with multiple weapons and I also hunt with guys that actually use modern rifles, we plan a number of food plots. Some are larger, some are smaller for bow type shots. So you might have a diversity of food plots on your property. This is actually one food plot on my farm. It goes down a little hill. It's just a real small one. And it is, I call it the bow stand. We call it the rock stand because we got a big old pile of rocks there, but it's definitely a bow stand. Shot a deer off of it already this year. And you can tell that, hey, it's very thick around the edges here. When a deer comes into that food plot, he's going to, he's only got about a 20, well, I wouldn't say 20 yards. I'd say about 15-yard wide food plot. If he's walking there and my stand is down there in the very bottom in that shady area to the left, I'm going to catch him as he comes across there. He's going to be within bow range. So this is just a good example of a bow food plot. I mean, doesn't mean you couldn't hunt it with a rifle. And that's another thing. I don't like my stands right on the food plot. I see so many times where people put a box stand, slap dang on the food plot, or they'll hang their hang-on stand or climber, on a tree looking into the food plot. Always back off a little bit. I think it's great to have some cover around you. You want to be protected. When a deer comes in the food plot, he knows he's vulnerable. She knows she's vulnerable. Same thing with a turkey, and they're going to have those eyeballs focused around them. They're going to notice you, if you move you're on the edge. So try to stay back and get some cover. All right. How do you food plot placement? Well, this is more I think more correctly, this is deer stand placement. It really depends. Early in the bow season, there are a lot of times when the wind is coming out of the south, southeast, and then it can change suddenly. I kind of handle this in a couple of different ways. On a lot of my bow setups, I will actually have a stand. I use a lot of hang-on stands. I'm going to have them on either side so that I can work with the wind no matter which way it's going. So if I see that, hey, we're going to have kind of a warm, balmy day, it's going to be sort of a south wind, maybe southeast, I'm going to have a stand to where, the wind is coming into my face that way and the food plot's out in front of me. If we get into the winter, it's colder, very typical to get a west or northwestern wind. I'm going to make sure that my stand is placed in a location that wind, again, is coming into my face and the plot's in front of me. So you really want to think about that. And that's true even when placing your stand without a food plot. you can't always predict the way the deer is going to come, but you want to have an idea of, hey, he's probably going to go this direction. And that's why we're actually going to talk about funneling the deer so that they come out where we want them to do. And that way the wind doesn't bust us. Because if you've hunted it all, and I've hunted everything from deer to bear to alligator, most of these things can bust you pretty quick if they get your scent. All right, pinch points and funnels. This gets back to, a little bit about what weapon are you using, but even if you're using a rifle, you certainly can, you can benefit from getting a closer in shot or getting the deer close to you. This is actually some of the crazy things I have tried and had pretty good success. We had a high tensile fence that, on occasion the deer they'd come over that thing in a heartbeat if they wanted to. Well, I just opened it up a little bit. At the time, we didn't have cattle in that one area. And if I'm looking at the lower picture now, and the deer, they will always go, or I should say always, but they will most always go to the point of least resistance. They're kind of lazy. If they got a little hole they can slide through, and I know you've seen this in fences before where they either go under or they'll go through where a broken wire is, that brings that deer closer to my bow shot. The one to the right top up there is where I took some of this, basically it's tensile wire that we use for temporary fencing. And I just sat there and made an opening. It was just in the woods. I put this stuff up, several strands. In the pasture, if the deer were to go to it, they know it's electrified, so they're a little bit fearful of it. Well, I had an opening there, even though you see that string coming across, that doesn't stay there. So I had like a gap, almost like a door to come through. And over a period of about a month or two, those deer just started coming right through that little gap, knowing, hey, that's a safe zone. I put a stand up not far from there, maybe 15 yards to the side of it, and it was a very effective bow spot for me. So that's kind of what you're trying to do, is steer the deer the direction you want them to go to kind of make the best opportunity for the shot you can. Here's another one where this is another food plot at my house. And if you look at both these are the same place, but if you look on the left, that chainsaw out there, I had dropped this tree into the food plot. My stand is to the right of where that chainsaw is, but the chainsaw is about where I would want the deer to be for my bow shot. I'm shooting at this point a recurve or a longbow. I'm about a 15, 20 yard man with that. So by dropping that tree, I sort of eliminate the risk that deer is going to come walking down either side on the edge. He's going to see that tree and he's going to work his way to the center and then come back around again. And I cannot tell you how many times this has worked in this food plot, along with others, where just that little bit of interference makes that deer curve a little bit, and boom, where he was, if he was all the way over to the side, he's maybe 25 yards from me. When he comes in close between the chainsaw and that drop tree, all of a sudden he's in my magic range. So it's just something to think about in your food plots. Once you create them, you can still modify to get the deer to move where you want them to. All right, and then look for natural funnels. This gets back, again, not really so much food plots, but if I'm scouting a place to hunt or put a stand up in the woods particularly, besides looking for natural food, I'm looking for places that are going to funnel the deer. And this was one down in the bottom of the farm in the swamp. I guess you can figure out what we have here. We've got two trees down almost either direction of each other, and in between is this natural occurring funnel. Great place to hunt right there, because the deer, again, they're going to come up to that tree and they're going to say, that looks like too much trouble to cross over, so I'm going to go around. Hey, there's an easy slot right through the middle. And you really can't see it, but there was a tremendous deer trail through the middle there where they were actually passing through. So that's a natural funnel. You can find that with large rocks, creeks, things like that. Use your imagination, or you can help create one. All right. Most of our food plots, we're going to try to get as much sunlight as we can. You might use hinge cuts on trees to thicken up the edges. Again, we're going to try to control where they come in. So we're going to use hinge cuts to create cover on the edges, but we're going to allow sunlight to come in. Even doing what we call tree injections, where you're actually killing out maybe something like a sweet gum, a non-mass tree, by putting in some type of a herbicide, is an effective way to kind of take out what we don't want. Just some other considerations on food plots. I said, what ratio of food plots do I need? I covered that. It really depends. 10% might be a good rule, but you can certainly get away with less than that, depending on your property. I like to have a lot of cover crop around. When I say cover crop, I'm talking about thick area that the deer can kind of pop out, whether it be planted pines or hinge cut trees. He feels like he can safely come into that food plot. That will get him into the food plot earlier than if it's in the wide open or there's very little cover. Then he's going to wait till dark before he approaches that. You should have a planned entry and escape per se for your deer stand. You should really try to not walk in the food plot. So think about, hey, how can I cut a trail effectively into my food plot where I'm not going to bust out every deer and spook it? So think about that. When's the best time to even hunt a food plot? That's debate. I've killed deer over food plots in the morning and the afternoon and in the late evening. I would say for me, really, I like food plots the best in the late evening. I think catching them just in that magic, 20 minutes before dark has always been the most effective time for food plots. It's also sometimes hard not to bust the deer out of the food plot early in the morning when you're walking into your stand. But there are plenty of times when deer get killed in the morning. So they can be effective anytime. I just prefer like the late evenings on the food plot. On your property, think about a sanctuary area. That's an area where you really don't go into. It might be a thicker area where there's going to be bedding going on, but you just don't want to hang stands in there. If you can, you want to try to stay out of there. It doesn't have to be a large area. On my property, again, out of 100 and something acres, we probably have about a 10-acre spot, which I kind of call the sanctuary. It's a thicker area. It's got briars and smaller trees. I know the deer bed in there, and we just sort of leave that alone. Okay. And now I was just going to mention trail cameras. I think they're a great tool. I do utilize them, but in the old days never did. Now I do. It's a great way to monitor what's going on your food plots, where the deer are actually entering. I don't have them, but a lot of the guys I know have got the cellular ones now where they can actually not even have to go to the camera and they're downloading pictures of what's happening. And that's kind of a cool way to monitor deer and turkey. And I hunt wild hogs as well. So a lot of them use it for their wild hogs. All right, let's get to the what should I plant stuff, where, when, and how. The summer food plots, we talked about it. I'm not a huge planter of summer food plots. I just have so much going on with my home garden and also the trials that I do for UGA. I'm doing corn trials and other type stuff that I just have little time to dedicate to building food plots. And there's so much green stuff out there already. I don't feel like the deer are starving to death. But, if you're really just super intense, you've got a really well-managed property and want to try it, there's certainly some things you can do. Iron clay peas, I have planted those many times before. If you plant them a little bit later in the spring or early summer, it may actually give you something to hunt over during the bow season. Iron clay peas are a fast-growing legume crop. They actually turn into pretty much of a vine that spreads out. And in my opinion, the deer, a lot of times will ignore them to start with. And then after a while, they start to get onto them. And once they do, they can really hammer them back to the ground. So anytime you plant anything like the peas, you need to have a pretty good size, I don't want to say acreage, but if you just plant a 10 by 10 spot thinking that's going to be a great food plot, you're going to have nothing left but stems. You probably need at least 1/4 of an acre more of iron clay peas. Same thing with soybeans and other type stuff. Otherwise, they're going to nail it. And once those peas get hit real hard down to a stem, they're not going to come back out of it. So plant, make sure you're planting a little bit larger size food plot. They can be a great summer feed for deer, and they'll normally make it into, probably till this time of the year, you could still be hunting different peas, iron clay peas and others, just like soybeans. You might be blessed to have a soybean field in your area near your hunting club that you can hunt near, or you could plant soybeans, very, very similar to the iron clay peas as far as how you plant them. Ross talked about make sure you get the pH up. Most times, we'll talk about inoculum in a minute, but most times the seed's already inoculated, so you won't have to worry about that. Just getting up the right fertility and so forth. You can have a nice summer. It makes a great place to scout deer in the summer. You can say, hey, what's coming there? I'm the summer pattern. There's the bucks I have, inventory, and so forth. Soybeans are kind of fizzling out, so you're not going to be hunting over them late in the season. Okay, buckwheat's a real fast annual. You could literally get out there and plant it right now, even though it's a summer annual, and probably get it to go. It can be planted, a little bit earlier than this. It is a fast-growing summer annual. Deer love it. They'll munch it up. It's a blooming plant. We use it a lot of time in the garden because it attracts pollinators. But it's a simple thing to plant, very easy to grow. You can buy buckwheat seed at feed stores and things like that. It's not going to last a long time, but if you just needed a real fast, super quick food plot for the summer or right before bow season. Try buckwheat. Lab beans I've used before. They're kind of overpriced. They kind of came with all this literature about what a miracle, food crop they were, or food plot crop. And I think the deer did like them, but they hammered them. They hammered them so hard that they were expensive too. It's like $100 a bag when I bought them. I don't think it was worth the money, to be honest with you. Iron clay peas or soybeans would have done the exact same thing for way less than half the cost. So you may love these things and they are good, but you better plant a good large acreage on them. Once the deer hit them pretty hard, they may not recover. Okay, corn, we're going to call it a warm season crop. We would plant corn, anywhere from late April into May. And, you could have that all summer long. The deer are really not going to mess with it until it starts to put an ear on. And once the ear comes on, the deer, the first thing they'll try to do is eat the silk. If it makes it through that and pollinates, eventually you'll have some ears on there. Great feed for, if you're going to have a late dove shoot, you can mow some of that corn in and attract doves. The deer will get into it anywhere between now and really, it could last probably for another month out there if the crop is left in the field. Corn's expensive. The seed's not real cheap. You got to have the right equipment. It takes a lot of fertilizer, particularly nitrogen. So it's not one I normally plant for a food plot. We plant a lot of sweet corn for eating, and we have to protect that because the deer will get into it. But I just don't plant a lot of food plot type corn. You might want to consider sorghum. It would certainly be, to me, cheaper and easier to grow than corn. Sorghum is another good bird attractor. Turkeys love it. Dove love it once the seed starts to fall, and the deer will eat the heads. Sorghum looks a lot like corn when it's first coming up, and it grows like corn. It's a grass, kind of a heavy nitrogen user, but it's more drought tolerant, and it's a little bit more forgiving if the planting conditions aren't great. So there are different sorghums out there, some of the really tall grain sorghums. There's a wildlife sorghum, which is shorter, 3 or 4 foot tall. It can actually create bedding cover for animals, deer, other type things, and as well as a food source. So some strips of sorghum, maybe in a large field of grasses and legumes, is a really cool food plot. It gives you diversity, some cover. So I've done that quite often where I'll take strips of sorghum and plant them in addition to other type combinations. All right, millet and sunflowers. I throw this in here. Yeah, you're thinking, oh, that's doves, that's birds, that's quail. Yeah, certainly the millet, sunflowers are very attractive to birds, but deer as well. You wanted a summer food plot. You're thinking, what could I plant? Millet is super easy. It's fairly cheap seed to establish. When I first started planting a dove field, I didn't think the deer liked it. I almost never saw them out there. And it might have been the second year or whatever, and boom, they started to come in. As soon as it puts out a seed head, they start ripping the seed heads off, almost to the point where it affects my dove field. So the deer will absolutely eat millet seeds. I don't know that they like the foliage that much, but they love the seed heads. If you've ever tried to plant sunflowers before in deer country, it is a difficult thing to do. Deer love sunflowers. It's a little bit more expensive. I don't know that I would absolutely recommend it for planting for deer, but if you want to throw something out there that'll bring them in, sunflowers will do it. It's going to, of course, be fizzling out this time of the year. It will no longer be attractive to them. But for a summer thing, if you want to try to get it for the doves, but also help the deer, they're going to find that. In most cases, you have to sort of protect that crop if you're planting it for doves. You're going to have some type of barrier to keep the deer out. All right, going to jump into fall and winter food plots. And this is kind of where we are right now. And first question, well, are we too late? Shouldn't we have done this program back a month ago? Well, maybe so, but we're not too late. We just now are finishing up our food plots down at our hunting club. I just got mine in right before this monsoon hit about a week or so ago. Almost too much rain came in, but no, we're still good. Soil temperatures are great. It doesn't matter where you are in the state. You can still get in your fall food plots. Where do I get my seed? And this goes for summer seed, winter seed. There's certainly everything available online now. All the sporting goods stores carry it, your feed stores. All kinds of marketing goes on in these things. You get pictures of big deer. You pay a lot for that marketing. You can buy individual seeds a lot cheaper and make your own mixes than you can some of these commercial mixes. But it depends on, how much do I want, how much time do I want to do? A lot of these mixes will come with, combinations of wheat and rye, sometimes crimson clover, sometimes Londino clover. The sky's the limit. And they're pre-mixed, they're pre-inoculated, and that's really nice for food plots. If you're building a lot, though, and need to save money, consider buying, separate bags of wheat, of oats, of rye, and then buy pounds of clover. Mix these together, make your own mixes. You're going to save a good bit of money doing that. Okay, wheat, mentioned that one just a second ago. I plant a lot of wheat in my food plots, and there's a good reason. Working here at the Griffin campus, we have a wheat breeder, and at the end of the year, he usually is getting rid of hundreds and hundreds of pounds of wheat, and he gives me some of it. So it goes into my food plots as one of the staple grasses. I also plant a very large area, about 5 acres in wheat, that eventually will be some of my cattle grazing for the winter. They'll go in there. So it is a very easy to germinate. You want to plant it right now, anywhere from about September through maybe late October to early November. You can plant wheat. It germinates fairly easy. You can do it as a standalone crop. The deer will come to it. I like it to be more in a mix with some clovers or possibly some other small grains, which we'll cover here in a second. I throw some oats in with my wheat. Oats are another cereal grain crop. Deer seem to find it very palatable. In other words, they will probably eat the oats before they will the wheat. It's a little bit more cold hardy. You can put the wheat in, you can get the oats in right now along with the wheat. Those two mixed together, maybe with a legume, make a very good food plot mix. There's different kind of oats out there, and you'll see big buck oats, forage oats. Yeah, they're good products. I normally buy the standard Coker oats, which is more of a, cereal oat planting type seed, and it seems to do fine for me. Rye, I've used a lot of this in some of my vegetable trials because we use it as a cover crop, and then we do what's called roller crimping. But for rye is actually very easy to establish. It looks a lot like wheat when it's growing, but it's a little bit more tenacious. So it normally thickens up better, can handle pretty cool temperatures. So rye is just another one you might throw in the mix. I like to have again, perfect scenario, throw some rye, oats, and wheat together in a mix, and that way you have the best of all worlds. Ryegrass, and some people might shoot me for putting this up here, particularly if you're a large, plantation manager. Ryegrass, why would you put it up there? So there's a difference between rye and ryegrass. Rye is a cereal grain. Ryegrass is what people normally use, annual ryegrass, in their lawns. They use it to sort of overseed the Bermuda, the centipede, and so forth. But ryegrass, in all honesty, can be a very easy food plot. And for many years before I had equipment and I wanted to get into food plots, I was basically using a large rake. I was cleaning the leaves off and planting areas in ryegrass. And by gosh, the deer loved it. They started coming to it. Ryegrass is highly attractive to deer. If you fertilize it, get some nitrogen to it, they will come to it. Why wouldn't you plant ryegrass? Well, the biggest thing land managers don't like is it's tenacious, which means it'll hang in there. It'll go all the way till it gets really hot, and then it'll fizzle out, and it reseeds itself pretty quickly. So once you plant ryegrass, you'll probably always have it, but doesn't mean that you can't go in there and plant other things with it. So I'm actually sort of a fan of ryegrass. I think it's you're going to pay, it's not the cheapest thing. Wheat is probably the cheapest grass out there as far as planting wheat. Ryegrass, you may pay upwards of $50 for a 50-pound bag. But if you want something that's got some really easy to germinate, rough site, can hardly get it going, ryegrass might be the answer. If you look at some of these commercial blends, I think there's one called Throw and Grow. And if you look at that, it's got a high content of ryegrass simply because they know you could just about throw it out the window of your truck and get it to grow. So it's fairly easy to establish. Okay. Clover, these are both perennial and annual clovers. I do like to have clover in the mix. Clover is a legume crop, meaning that it produces its own nitrogen. It really adds to the soil. Crimson clover, top left, is an annual clover that sometimes you'll see in seed mixes. It's a really easy to grow clover as long as you have the pH right and you have enough moisture. The other annual, it's called arrowleaf clover down there, and there are other ones as well. It's a larger growing clover I've used before, I've had very good success with. Sometimes it will overseed itself and come back the next year. Lindino clover and the Durana clover, those are perennial clovers, and they're just, one of several or a couple of several. Those are clovers that that can possibly persist from year to year. Money wise, if you could buy the Lindino, Durana, or something like that, and get it to establish and live for several years, you'll be well ahead of the game. You don't have to replant it each year. I was talking to a guy the other day. He said he had the same Durana clover patch for 10 years now. So it does take some management. It normally takes soils that aren't extremely droughty. So it might be an area maybe in the lower part of your property. I don't want to say swampy, but an area that maybe stays a little moist. Getting some shade in the afternoon doesn't hurt it at all. But clovers are a great mix. I don't normally want to plant clover by itself. I'm usually going to plant it with some type of a grass type crop to help establish and protect it. Inoculant, I use that word a couple of times. Inoculant is a naturally occurring bacteria that can be in the soil. And what it does, it helps to chew or break down the seed coat of legume crops. Legumes are clover, peas, and so forth. Okay. Nowadays, when you buy seed, oftentimes it'll come pre-inoculated. But still, if you're going to make your own mixes and you say buy 5 pounds of crimson clover or Lindino, there's chances are it may not be inoculated yet. So you'll have to ask the feed store, hey, is this inoculated? If they say no, then you need to buy a bag for a couple of dollars of inoculant. Basically, what you do is wet this stuff and spread it all over the seeds. And it will have this bacteria coat that will help that seed to germinate. If you don't do that, your germination is going to be extremely poor. All right, winter peas. Again, this is another legume crop. You can inoculate it, but usually you don't have to. It's another thing that deer are just going to love. It'll be like candy in the candy store, and it's going to persist through a good part of the winter till we get extremely cold. Turnips and radishes, I have experimented. I've planted these. We plant, we plant these things in the garden to eat. But my experience with them is deer will eat them. At first, they tend to ignore them. Then when it gets extremely cold, we get several good frosts in. I believe the sugar content must go up in these. They start to turn a little purple. They get phosphorus deficient, and then boom, the deer seem to come into them. So it is definitely something that you might want to consider. You could do some small plots of it and see how they like it, or you could mix it in with other things. But it's one to consider, and it actually does quite well in our Georgia soils. Chicory is another perennial that can persist for several years. It is kind of in the Brassica family. It's once it's established, in my opinion, it might take the deer a year or two to get used to it. They don't seem to like it right away. And then once they find it and begin to eat it, they really do come back to it. So chicory is another one that I think would do well in our Georgia soils. It is sometimes found in some of the perennial deer mixes that you see advertised. And so it's a pretty good one. All right. You're planting all these food plots, but you want to make sure you protect them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but using either some type of electric fence system or one of these plot savers, which is a really bad smelling substance, you might need to keep the deer out of the food plot until it gets time for them to go in there. I haven't necessarily had a big problem with this. I don't normally have to protect them, but I do know places, particularly if you're planting sunflowers and things like that, you're probably going to have to try to keep the deer or whatever out by doing that. So it's one thing to consider. I'm trying to speed up because I know I'm running out of time. Weed control, we mentioned that just briefly, but you may need to do some pre-emergent herbicides. You might need to do some, pre-existing weed control with glyphosate, something like Roundup. And then there are different chemicals, particularly if you're growing more corn and sorghum, you might be using something like atrazine or Dual. That's where the county agents can be real helpful in helping you with weed control. But you don't want weeds to take over your food plot and steal the benefits. Just going to mention quickly on fruit. It's not something that you have to do, but it's something to consider for long-term perennial, food availability. Apple trees, pears, persimmons, muscadines, crab apples, all can be a good addition to your overall plan in attracting wildlife. And all of these, are going to be visited by deer. They love muscadines. I know there's wild muscadines out in the woods, but none of those produce like some of the cultivated ones we have. Pears extremely attractive to deer. We know about persimmons, but we have cultivated persimmons that are much more hardy and will produce better. So something to think about. And then, do you want to add long-term stuff like mass trees, possibly? Some of the oak trees that we have, we know that if we plant them now, we're probably not going to benefit from them from a long time. The sawtooth oak is actually an imported Japanese oak that some of you have seen before. It is one of the fastest to produce nuts. Usually within 10 years or so, you can start getting acorns out of that. A white oak, hopefully you find a white oak on your property that you can hunt next to, because if you plant a little one right now, the chances of it putting out nuts in your lifetime are probably slim. Chestnut oak puts out the really, really large acorns, but it is something to talk about for long term. Just real quickly on the required equipment, the sky's the limit again. If you're going to be doing a number of food plots, I would think about investing in a tractor. I really love a tractor with the tiller, like on the top right. Once you get that land busted up, the tiller makes it really nice to weed control, fluff it up, get it ready to go. Certainly a small disc can do the job, but it's not as easy as it looks. Tractors are going to cost money. Most of the tractors, even used ones, are going to run anywhere from 10,000 on up. A small tractor in the 30 to horsepower range is probably going to run around 25,000 or more. I would recommend, if you're going to buy a tractor, just real quick, I would definitely get 4-wheel drive, front wheel assist. I would recommend getting a loader, a bucket on the front, because you will find 1,000 different ways in your land management to use that bucket. So just a couple of food for thought. You don't have to have a tractor to build food plots, but if you're going to do a lot of them, eventually it's probably where you want to go. Don't forget about Georgia Forestry. Hey, maybe you don't have this equipment or the pocketbook to buy it. Georgia Forestry will come out and plow your food plots. You got to contact them. They will charge you, and I don't know what the rate is. Seemed like last I heard it was about $120 per hour or something like that. But if you get a couple of food plots done in a couple hours, you don't have to take care of a tractor. You don't have to buy a tractor. That's one good way to do it. So Georgia Forestry can come out and plow it for you. ATV, we use a lot of ATVs on our farm, also at the club. There are certainly implements that you can pull behind them. My experience is most of the implements are pretty light. So unless you have that the land previously broken by larger equipment, and dished up by Georgia Forestry or a tractor, you're going to spend a lot of time out there with an ATV. But ATVs are helpful in doing the final dragging, seeding, spraying, and other type things. So, and there are a lot of implements out there you can purchase. For the smallest of small food plots or a little getaway spot, a hand tiller can do the job. I don't want to be doing a lot of hand tilling on big food plots, but occasionally you'll find a really little honey hole spot. Hey, I'd love to have just a real small food plot. Think about a hand tiller. It's not completely out of the question. Whoop, went the wrong way. Okay, some type of a spreader. Obviously, you're going to need that for your seed, whether it be a hand spreader, and I've put out many a food plot with a hand spreader. I've also liked the tractor-mounted ones where I can put out my seed and fertilizer. Makes it way easier. Once you got that stuff in that big cone on that tractor, you just go at it and sling it out. Again, ATV spreaders, I normally would not spread fertilizer out of these, but for putting seed in smaller food plots, it can be pretty accurate at doing that. And there are many different types of seeders out there, but these can be real handy on the back of an ATV. This is kind of what I use on my property. I've got one of these Woods food plot seeders, like on the left side right there. What it does, even though I sort of break the food plots up with a hair, I come with this, and what it does, it sort of discs it. It puts the seed in. You can put the legume crop in one side, the larger seed in the other. It's basically a seed drill, if you will. It's a little bit, it's not a no-till drill, but it pretty much cuts the seed open, the slit, puts the seed in, and then cold packs it behind it. So then you can get a full-size drill if you like. And for larger food plots where you're going to be doing this, or you have a farm already, you're going to have to do some grazing for cattle. A drill is an awesome way to plant a food plot. You'll actually wind up using a lot less seed because you don't have to put it at quite the rate as if you broadcast it. But this equipment's expensive. You can get some of the smaller Woods drills like that. The smallest one is about a 4 foot. It's going to run about 5,000. And then of course, real estate goes up from there. Large drills can run anywhere from, 12 to 25,000. So, but it is a piece of equipment. If you're going to be doing this all the time, or you're in a hunting club that, has funds, it's something you want to consider because it takes the place of a lot of different equipment. Push planter, we use these for planting corn, like in the home garden. But if you got it in a crunch, you couldn't afford anything else, you could plant rows of sorghum, corn, sunflowers with a push planter. You might be worn out by the end of the day, depending on how much you plant, but it certainly would get the job done. The one on the left is a Covington. The one on the right is just a little Earthway for about $100, but would do the job. All right. I don't know if you've seen this one before, but this was, I got this, I don't know, it was in my email. I got it a long time ago. But that guy looks like he's about to have a rough day. If you see the elk, obviously in the guy, but there's a mountain lion standing behind him. And I doubt this is a real picture. If it is, you know, I'd love to see the picture that came after that. Can't be very good. But I know I kind of rushed at the end. I like to get people out on time, but Ross, let me turn it back over to you and we'll try to take some questions. Gosh, I probably could have gone 3 hours on food plots, but I tried to jam in a lot of stuff in a short period of time.
All right. Thank you, Bob. That was great. So if anyone has any questions, again, you'll stick those over in the Q&A, and we'll have Bob here for a few minutes if anybody wants some questions answered. While we're going to do that, I'm going to put the, we got a quick little survey we'd like y'all to do just to, you know, tell us how we did, you know, some questions. It should take you 2 or 3 minutes. But I'm going to post that in the chat, the link for it. So if you have a question, just post them right over here in the Q&A and we'll answer them real quick. All right, there's the survey coming out to you. If y'all will please fill those out, that helps us here at Extension, you know, get some feedback from y'all that tells us, you know, how we did. If you have any other topics that you would like to do at a later time, you know, suggestions, anything like that, we always want to get that information back. It helps us with our job and helps us to, you know, maybe do more programs like this. So, all right, John Davis says, Bob, he says, what is the max amount of different seed types do you put in a 1 acre food plot?
Yes, that's a great question. It's really up to you. I like to have, like I mentioned earlier, some type of diversity. So the minimum I would normally have would be probably 2 different types of seeds. And it might be a combination of something like wheat and clover or oats and clover, rye and clover, something like that. Maximum, you know, if you could try 2 different things, you could put in at least a 5-way mix, which we might have some wheat, oats, maybe some rye, along with clover and winter peas. So that would be like best of all worlds. Or what you could do, and I've done this before, and it's really kind of fun to do, is divide up your 1 acre food plot into 2 different quadrants. And one of them is going to sort of have a wheat and clover mix. Another one's going to possibly have some of the turnips and radishes we talked about. And then boom, you move over a little bit more. And I've got, you know, now I've got maybe a mixture of winter peas and rye. So you can do it like that. But I think having a choice out there, and every, you know, not all deer seem to behave the same. I've had people say, I planted that, they wouldn't touch it. We plant it down at the club and they annihilate it. So at least the first year or two, kind of playing around using some strips of other, you know, of several things makes it interesting to see what the deer seem to prefer best. Also allows you to kind of catch, you know, some diversity in bringing a lot of deer over there to try different things. And then eventually you might taper it down and say, hey, you know what, these 3 items, these 4 items are the thing I really need to plant because that's what's getting hit. So, you know, at least 2 things, but maybe up to at least 5 items in a food plot.
All right. Thank you, Bob. So our next question is the video going to be available to watch again? So yes, we are going to actually, hold on one second. So Mark, the survey, I just posted in the chat. You should be able to just click on that link right there. And it should take you right to it. Let me know if you have any more problems. But yeah, back to the video. We are going to post this probably on YouTube. We're going to actually have probably have the subtitles put on it first, but it'll probably be maybe a week or so, maybe 10 days. But eventually we'll have this available where people can go back and rewatch it anytime you want. Mark, were you able to access the survey? Okay, people are saying they're not seeing it. I'll try to paste it again here. It says to host and panelists. So let's see. Let's try to everyone. Maybe that'll work. All right. How about now? Okay, good deal. All right. Anybody got any more questions for Bob? All right. John has replied, thank you for doing the program today. We appreciate y'all coming and listening in with us. I thought Bob did an excellent job. All right. Well, I think this is going to conclude our program. Like I said, if y'all will, wait a minute, we got one.
All right.
Bradley Collins says, what would you plant for turkey in Southeast Georgia?
Okay, so yeah, planting for turkey. Some of the same things you would plant in the fall wildlife food plot will be attractive to turkey, and I'll give you an addition to that. But if you're planting any kind of wheat or clover, the turkeys will utilize that. They'll eat the heads off the wheat when it comes mature, about during the time of turkey season. I have hunted food plots with oats before, where the turkeys were sitting there plucking the oat heads off the wheat heads. They'll also eat clover directly. Just having a field of green out there will be attractive to them as they come out and strut and find insects. In addition, I've never planted these before, but in the south part of the state, they say chufa. Chufa is actually a type of nutsedge, which is highly attractive to turkeys. It is a planting you have to do every year. You're planting these little root system tubers that you put in the ground. And what will happen is once that stuff starts to grow, the turkey will dig it up to get to those roots. And they say they absolutely love them. So I've never planted chufa before, but I've always heard that was excellent for turkeys.
Okay, Bob, we got another one over here for you. It says, how far in advance do you need to apply lime and fertilizer?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know if you want to answer that, or I can do it.
I'll let you take that one, Bob.
Yeah. So, if you're planting your fall food plot, obviously you should have had your lime taken care of. Lime is something that takes a good 2 to 3 months before it actually goes in and it begins to adjust the pH. So I would like to, if I'm going to plant a fall food plot for the first time, I would prefer to be taking my soil samples in the springtime so that I can get the lime out there several months in advance. As far as the fertility goes, I wouldn't put that out basically till the day of planting. While the phosphorus and the potassium will hold in that soil and actually be available for many months, maybe even a year, the nitrogen is extremely volatile, meaning it's going to leach, it's going to be used up. It's going to basically leave the site quickly. So the nitrogen you really want to have available within days of planting. So fertilizing either, the day of planting or within a week after planting, I think would be the most important way to do that.
Yep, I totally agree with that, Bob.
Okay.
Any more questions? And we can hang out a minute or two if anybody, has got more questions. Please don't feel rushed.
And Ross, I was just going to say, man, I really enjoyed doing the program. I'm wishing everybody hopefully a great, successful hunting season. Everything I said here, don't take it as the only way to do it. I'm always learning myself. I learn, from visiting other places, reading stuff, and there are always different combinations and things that'll work. Most of what I ever talk about in my career is stuff I've experienced and I've either had success or failure with. But certainly, there's some things I covered today that will work for some folks and others it might be impractical. But just shoot, if you find me online, my email's on there. You got some ideas or suggestions, email me those, and I certainly will utilize it and probably try it in the program as well.
All right. Well, if anybody else doesn't have any more questions, I think we're going to end the meeting. Really appreciate everybody coming and being with us. And thank you, Bob, for doing this for us. It was really great. And I enjoyed it. I don't know about the rest of everybody, but I certainly did. And I hope that possibly we might could do another one next year. And maybe, like you said, we'll try to do it a little earlier. And that way we have a little earlier and a little more timely. But I think that this is a really good program, so I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Enjoyed it too. You take care.
All right. Please complete the surveys if you don't mind, and we'll try to see if we can get the video done and possibly send it out to everybody. So thank y'all for being with us today. Have a good day.
And David, thanks